Well, hello there. My name is Mark Miles. I love helping trainers, presenters, workshop facilitators really take their results to the next level. And today's video, I want to talk to you about a topic around going from a passive presenter to a dynamic engager, right? Now, a bit of a weird title, but what we often find is when people are first starting out presenting, they often feel like they're on the back foot. They often feel like they're at the mercy of their audience, but eventually when you make the decision to really show up powerfully, you realize that you've got to make that distinction or that difference between being passive to being active, right? And I want to share a big distinction that I got very early on in one of my very first public speaking workshops I ever went to, which completely transformed my thinking around actually engaging an audience, right? So I was attending a public speaking workshop, and it was back in 2009, a long time ago. And we were learning some skills, and we would go out and present to little pods, and we'd have experiences of receiving feedback from people, and it was very, very, very intense, right? But one of the things that happened at that event was I got one piece of feedback that transformed my life, one piece of feedback that really shifted the dynamic for me as a trainer presenter. And that piece of feedback was the following: go after the audience. I'm like, what do you mean? And the mentor at the time, he said, go after the audience. Right now, you're too passive. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, right now, you're asking questions and to the audience, which is great, but you're answering your own questions. So the audience think they can sit there and do nothing. I'm like, oh, okay. He said, go after the audience and set the expectation that they have to be involved, right? And to the degree that you actually go after the audience is to the degree they will actually participate. And I realized if I actually wanted to get them to participate, I needed to shift my thinking and shift my approach, right? And shift my overall posture. So here's a couple of things to go from passive to a dynamic, engaging speaker. All right. So the first one is you want to set the expectation very early up front that everybody needs to be taking notes, and you want to be using the phrase grab a pen and write this down. Grab a pen and write this down. Grab a pen and write this down. You want to be setting up urgency around that, right? There's just an expectation that people will be taking notes because they'll need the information later on, during your workshop or during their lives going forward, right? Next thing is never, ever, ever, as I've already said, answer your own questions. So don't do the Ferris Bueller, anyone, or, does anyone know how many steps there are to X, Y, Z? Yeah, there are 3 steps to XYZ, right? You never want to actually answer your own questions because immediately you've just told the audience that they don't need to actually answer you. You're going to answer you for yourself, right? It's a bit of a silly thing to do. So instead, what you want to do is you want to be able to hold the space. Hold the space. Just be able to go, all right, I'm waiting for an answer, folks. I'm holding the space, right? And be very comfortable in silence because silence is not a bad thing. Next one, you want to be checking in regularly, right? So you want to be asking questions like, does that make sense? You want to be asking questions like, all right, here's the steps to do it, or here's the how to do it. And now the magic question. Before I move on, folks, what was point number 3 there? Go ahead and could someone let me know what was point number 3 on that slide there? Or use the expression, before I move on, let me check in. How will you be using point number 5 in your workplace or your environment? Bill over there. Bill, how? And actually engaging the audience, right? So questions like, does that make sense? Or before I move on, let me check in. Before I move on, let me check in. And getting people to actually engage with the content, right? Because what you don't want to be doing is using silly phrases like, are you all still with me? Or, is this still making sense, folks, right? Whenever you use those expressions, you have pretty much presupposed that people are not paying attention. You presuppose that your content is boring. So instead, you want to be proactively checking in with your audience. Does that make sense? All right, before we move on, let me check in. All right. Before I move on, let me check in. Before I move on, let me check in. And the biggest thing I want you to take away from this slide is, or from this activity is, and lay it out for them, right? You don't want to be the person that is on the back foot all of the time. And I'll just touch on another thing. If you're the kind of person that says, does anyone have any questions? And you get silence, maybe you need to change your approach around that, right? And that's a topic for another video on the topic of constantly saying, does anyone have any questions, right? And that inner, that forbidding silence that comes straight after it, you look unprofessional, folks. So stop asking the question, does anyone have any questions, right? There's other ways to do that, and that's another topic for another video. But today's video is all about how do we go from passive to being dynamic, right? And the ways to do that is in our minds, go after the audience, right? And in the online world, the equivalent of that is if you're going to ask a question, you do not move on until you've got a response from every single person in that chat box, right? And if you're dealing with audiences of like 20 or 50 or 100, that's fine. You still want to make sure that you kind of set the impression that you're not going to move on until everybody's dropped in their answer, right? And that sets the expectation. Wow, as an audience member, I matter. As an audience member, my response is important. As an audience member, if I don't respond, the session's not going to move on. So the idea is go after the audience, go after them, and don't move on until you've got a response. All right, really, really important there. So let's recap. Number one, get people to write things down very quickly. Next, never answer your own questions. Just don't. It's weird, right? Next one, hold the space. Be comfortable in the silence. Next one is be checking in regularly. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? And never before, just as I've thought of it now, don't ever say, do you understand, right? Just please don't ever use the word understand. Not appropriate. Does that make sense, right? Or the other one you can absolutely use, highly recommend, before I move on, let me check in. Before I move on, let me check in. Actually ask a question to the group, all right, about what you've just taught, or a future pacing leading question, such as, all right, this thing here is about blah, blah. How will you be using blah, blah? Or who will you be using that with? Or, where do you see yourself using that thing, right? Whatever your future pacing question is there. And last of all, make sure that you have the mentality of, I'm going to hold the space, I'm going to go after my audience, and I'm going to make sure that's a collaborative learning experience there. All right. So hopefully you got some value from this, and definitely please stop using the expression, is everyone following along? Is it all still making sense? Is everyone keeping up with me? Please stop using those expressions, because you're really insulting your audience by using those expressions. Just stop it. Stop it. Stop it. All right. On that note, hopefully you got some value from that, and you started to see how you can make the shift from passive to a dynamic, engaging speaker. Thanks for watching, team, and we'll see you on the next one. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Let's get this message out there and continue to raise the standards of training in Australia and globally, so that your learners and your participants have the best experience possible and have the transformation that you're really looking to empower them with. Thanks for watching, team.